Hello, my name is Ryan, and you're listening to the CrimeCast. In this show, we will talk about true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and cryptid creatures from all over the world, from the mountains of the Himalayas to the suburbs of Los Angeles. And welcome to episode 13 of the CrimeCast, in part 4 of me covering the most haunted places in almost every U.S. state. Today we will be visiting the small town of Villisca, Iowa, into a house known as the Villisca Axe Murder House. I'm going to put a little trigger warning. I will be going into slight detail about the scene, the murder scene, so if you don't want to hear that, I suggest skipping that part, but I will remind you once that part comes up. But I'm not sure how long we'll be talking about it until editing, so skip around if you need to. I also want to note that I'm going to be using kind of the same format as I did for the Dyatlov Pass episode, so if you want to hear that one, just click on the iCard above. But with that all out of the way, let's get into the Villisca Axe Murder House / case. The date is June 10th, 1912. Location 508 on the corner of East 2nd Street and South 6th Avenue in Villisca, Iowa. At around 7 a.m., Mary Peckham noticed that her neighbors, the Moores, had not come outside to do their morning chores. This was unusual because the house was normally bustling with life, but it seemed to be unusually quiet. So Mary decided to go knock on her neighbor's door just to make sure everything was okay. When she got to the house, she noticed it was locked, but continued to knock and tap on the windows, but it seemed no one was responding. So Mary would leave the Moore's residence, but would actually go and let their chickens out, which is kind of strange to do, but she's like, oh, that was a very strange thing to do. And what's crazy that almost every site I visited to do research mentioned this. So it seems like an important bit of detail, but we'll go into that later on. So once she got back to her house, she would call up Jose Moore's brother, Ross Moore, telling him what she had noticed and to, get over here. So Ross Moore would arrive to the house and did the same thing as Mary Peckham did, knock on all the windows and doors, but he didn't get an answer as well. So, with a spare key, he would open the door to the Moore's house, and what he saw was a scene like no other. So the day before was June 9th, and it was Children's Day at the local church, with many families going to the church that day, including the Moores and the Stieglers. We'll get into the Stieglers in a minute, with Mrs. Moore leading the event. So Mrs. Moore was very active in the church community in Villisca, and even the whole entire family was very well liked in the community, which is kind of strange for what's about to happen to them. And, of course, hence the name, they were kind of killed. And so here are our victims. Jose B. Moore was 45 and a prominent businessman in Villisca. His wife, Sarah Moore, was 39 and was an active member of the church and had led the Children's Day event that day. Herman Moore, 11, was the eldest Moore sibling, followed by Mary Moore, age 10, Arthur Moore, age 7, and Paul Moore, age 5, and was the youngest Moore and also the youngest victim. There was also Ina and Lena Stilger, 8 and 12, who had been invited by Mary for a sleepover that night. So you can kind of see that, the Stieglers and the Moores kind of had a close relationship because of their girls. June 9th. So this was the day of the event, but we're going to fast forward a bit in the day. At around 8 p.m., the Moores and Stieglers would have arrived at the church. The Children's Day event would have started soon afterwards at around 8:10, 8:15, very late, but still kind of early. It is unclear when Mary would ask the Siegler sisters to spend the night at their house, but the girls would say yes, and the parents would say yes as well. But we do know that the Children's Day event ended at around 9:30 p.m., so it could have lasted about an hour 30, an hour. We don't know how long this event lasts, but we do know that they did spend a significant chunk of time that night at the church, walking to the church and walking back to the church, from the church. And the group would reach the Moore's residence between 9:45 and 10 p.m. So they had about a 15 to 30-minute walk from the church to the Moore's residence. Kind of a long distance, but still enough time for maybe someone to sneak into the house or even figure out how to get in. Who knows? So now we're going to get into the event. The location is, of course, the Moore's residence, with the Moore's bedrooms being located upstairs and the Siegler sisters staying in a guest bedroom downstairs near the living room area. We're unsure of the time, but it's believed that a little bit after midnight. Of course, this is after they would have arrived home. A man would come into the house. Now, you may be like, okay, why aren't the doors locked? Because their front door was locked in the morning. Well, it was actually very common in this time period for smaller communities like Villisca to just have your door unlocked, so your neighbors could come in and be like, hey, how you doing? Can I have some butter or something? So the door I used, there was a table near it, and there was an oil lamp. And the man took this and lit it so he could, be able to see around the house, but not give off too much light. But of course, it's like the 1900s. You're not going to get that much light. Anyways, in one hand was his lamp, and in the other an axe. But we'll get into this axe later because we do find out. Well, I'm just going to spoil it. Spoilers! The axe belonged to the Moore's family. Wait, does this sound similar to another case? That's probably what you're thinking. I'm not thinking that totally, but we'll get into all this later. It seemed like the man had a good layout of the house. So it's like he was either watching the Moores or had been in the house before. He would first make his way into Mr. and Mrs. Moore's room. After entering the room, he raised the axe so high it left gouge marks in the ceiling of their bedroom, which you can still see today if you go visit the house. The man would first kill Mr. Moore, hitting him in the back of his skull with just one hit. It is believed that due to how quickly Mr. Moore was killed, Mrs. Moore wasn't awoken by her husband being killed. The next victim was Mrs. Moore. Now this is kind of weird. The killer then walked back into the Moore's children's bedroom because when you go up the stairs in this house, it's the children's bedroom that you have to go through to get to the parents. So the children didn't hear their parents getting killed or this guy even walking through their bedroom the first time. So he went back in to the children's bedroom, and just like with their parents, none of the kids had woken up during the killing or even before and after it happened. The killer then made his way back downstairs where the Sieglers were sleeping. It is believed that Ina, who is the youngest sister, didn't wake up during this time, but her sister, Lena, may have woken up before she was murdered because there's kind of a little bit of evidence showing that maybe she did struggle a little bit, but we're unsure if that is true or not. The killer stayed. Now, what's very odd is that the killer would stay in the house for a period of time, because after killing the Siegler sisters, he went back upstairs and he attacked the Moore family again, leaving them unrecognizable. Mr. Moore would have been struck around 30 times, so he was the one that had the most trauma done to him. After the killer placed sheets over the Moore parents' head and clothing over their children. He then went around to every window and mirror, placing clothes over them or even cloth. This is kind of strange that he kind of did this to them and kind of hid his evidence to himself and to anybody who was like at the crime scene the next day. But we don't know why he did this. During the search the next day, they found a they found the killer took a 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon and placed it in the downstairs bedroom, and a keychain was found next to the meat, which they're like, what the fuck is this? They're like, okay, whatever. One of the last things he did before leaving, it's just like this is assumed, was wash his hands. This was due to a bowl of water with blood being found in it. The killer then placed the lamp at the top of the stairs, and he would take the house keys and lock the door before leaving at around 5 a.m. So he stayed in the house for around 5 to 6 hours, it's assuming. If he got in there at midnight, it would have been 5 hours. If before midnight, maybe 6 hours at most. And of course, nobody woke up. Not even the friggin' neighbors knew about this, but they're probably asleep, so they didn't really give a two shits about this anyways, so yeah. The next day was June 10th. As I stated earlier, Mary Peckham would be the first person to notice how quiet the house was the next day, but what I didn't note was that Mary Peckham had went outside her house at around 5 a.m. To do some laundry, and she didn't notice anything strange. She didn't see anybody leaving the Moore's house because, like we stated, it's believed the murderer left at around 5 a.m. So either Miss Peckham over here didn't see him, or she noticed him but didn't think anything about it. Maybe thinking it was Mr. Moore leaving early for something, to do something. We don't know. Yeah, kind of strange. But so we know that Ross Moore, Mr. Moore's brother, would come and he entered the house, but he would leave very quickly because of what he sees, and he called the sheriff. Hank Horton, alongside Hank, would come 3 doctors or a couple people. Well, let me just explain this. So Hank, the sheriff, would bring Dr. J. Clark Cooper, Dr. Egert Haug, saying that right, hopefully, and the minister of their church, Weasley Ewidge, and the county coroner would bring a 3rd doctor, Dr. F.S. Williams. So there's like a shit ton of doctors, a shit ton of people here for a murder. But it's a murder. Nothing like this happens. Mr. Williams, even though he was one of the last people to arrive at the scene, would be the first to examine the bodies, which is kind of crazy because seeing that they may have died at around midnight, these bodies are 8 hours old, and it's probably smelling like shit in there, or like decomposing bodies. But he would be the last to arrive on the scene, and he would examine the bodies and determine the time of death, which gives us maybe what time the killer came in the house to maybe what time he left. We're just assuming all of this. Once he came out, a crowd had, of course, started to form outside the house, and he would tell them, quote, "Don't go in there, boys. You will regret it until the last day of your life," end quote. But because it's 1912, did people listen? No, because as many as 100 neighbors and townspeople would ignore this and went into the house. This caused damage to the crime scene due to all the fingerprints, and even a fragment of Mr. Moore's skull was taken by one of the town's members. He just up and snatched this guy's skull. He just said, "Oh, I want this," and left the crime scene. Like, what? But of course, it's 1912. How are they going to control this? They're just going to let them wander in. But yeah. Okay, so before we get into the facts of this, you may be wondering, this sounds very familiar to another axe murder case. And you're right, this is very similar to the Lizzie Borden house, which we will be covering in about 2 episodes. So I can't wait to make like an episode comparing the 2 murders. I'm going to do that now. I don't care if you're going to listen to that or not. You're getting it from me. Okay, that was so aggressive. I'm so sorry. Okay, so here are the facts that we know. 8 people had been bludgeoned to death, presumably with an axe left at the crime scene. It appeared that all had been sleeping at the time of the murders. That's right, the axe was left at the crime scene. Very Lizzie Borden-like. The doctors estimated a time of death as somewhere shortly after midnight. The curtains were drawn on all of the windows in the house, except for 2, which did not have curtains, so sheets were placed over those windows. And that they belonged to the Morris family. All the victims' faces were covered with the bedcloths after they were killed. A Kanisan lamp, which is a type of oil lamp that was used at the time, was found at the foot of the bed of Jose and Sarah Moore, with the chimney off and the wick had been turned back. The chimney was under the dresser. So that's how the smoke would get out and how they turned on the lamp and stuff. But there were 2 lamps that apparently nobody noticed until the investigation. A similar lamp was then found at the foot of the Stiegler girl's bed, with the chimney also off. So there's 3 lamps in this house, but the killer only used the 1. Kind of weird, but we'll get into that later on. The axe was found in the room accompanied by the Stiegler girls. It was bloody, but an attempt had been made to wipe off the blood to kind of hide it. The axe would belong to Jose Moore, kind of similar to Lizzie Borden, where the axe belonged to the Borden family. Now, I said this earlier, but the ceilings in both the parents' and kids' rooms upstairs showed gouge marks, apparently made by the upswing of the axe. We'll get into that a little bit later on. A piece of keychain was found on the floor in the downstairs bedroom next to the meat slab. A pan of bloody water was discovered on the kitchen table, as well as a plate of uneaten food. So this guy made himself a plate of food and just didn't eat it. Okay, buddy boy, why would you do that? We don't know. All of the doors were locked. The bodies of Lena and Ina Stiegler were found downstairs, the downstairs bedroom off the parlor. Ina was sleeping closest to the wall, with Lena on her right side. A great coat covered her face. Lena, according to an inquest testimony of Dr. F.S. Williams, quote, lay as though she kicked 1 foot out of her bed sideways, with one hand under the pillow on her right side, half sideways, not cleared, just over a bit. Apparently she had been struck in the head and squirmed down in the bed, perhaps 1/3 of the way, end quote. Lena's nightgown was slit up and she was wearing no undergarments. There was a bloodstain on the inside of her right knee and what the doctors assume was a defense wound on her arm. So, what's crazy is, before this, of course, is a fact, but I just want to state this now. Lena was not SA'd at all. There was no evidence that she was, but they assumed that maybe she did wake up at one point and, notice this, but we're not sure. Dr. Lindquist, the coroner, reported a slab of bacon on the floor in the downstairs bedroom lying near the axe. Weighing nearly 2 pounds, it was wrapped in what he thought may have been a dish towel, with a second slab of bacon about the same size being found in the Moore's icebox. So this just put pieces together of why there was a piece of bacon there, and that the bacon belonged to the Moores, and the killer just brought it out for some reason. Lindquist also noted that one of Sarah's shoes, which he found on Jose's side of the bed, the shoe was found on its side. However, it had blood inside of it, as well as underneath it. It was Lindquist's assumption that the shoe had been upright when Jose was first struck, and that the blood would run off the bed and into the shoe. And to believe the killer later returned to the bed to inflict additional blows and subsequently knocked over the shoe. So this is all of the facts, early facts and facts we still know to this day about this case. It's kind of weird that there's these little bits of information. We're not sure why that happened. Why didn't the kids wake up? Why is there bacon? Why did he lock the doors? Because if he went into the house, he should have noticed it was locked, but who knows? Early suspects. What's surprising about this murder is that the police already had a few suspects, like kind of right away almost. Even though they tried to look for the killer in the town and the surrounding area, he already had around a 5 hour lead already, so he could have left the county and, of course, maybe the state at that point. Who knows? One of the earlier suspects was a local businessman named Frank Jones. Jones and Mr. Moore had competition with one another because, there's these two businessmen. They're gonna want to, compete with one another to get the most business. Or, whatever they were doing. There had been rumors that Mr. Moore was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law. Although this could not be proven, and it's still not proven, did he have an affair? We don't know. Another early suspect even confessed to the murder, but later recanted this statement due to police brutality. So he was like, so the police are like, did you murder him? Did you murder this family? Why? And he's like, yeah, I did. And then later on, he's like, the police forced me to say yes. They were just hounding me with these questions, and I just felt like I had to say yes for them to stop. Kind of common today. Okay, let's continue. Another early suspect was Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly. Kelly was an English immigrant with a history of sexual deviances and mental problems. Kelly admitted 2 things that day. He was in the town the night of the murders and had left early, but Kelly's small-statured and meek personality led people doubting his involvement. But some things led police believing it was Kelly. He was left-handed. Due to the blood splatters, police suspected the killer to be a lefty, and also of how the gouge marks and the ceilings, that kind of was oh, maybe he's a lefty, because people try with their right hand to do that, they miss that shit. They did it with their left hand. Oh, we can hit it. He had a history with the Moore family and actually had been seen watching them both in church and in town. So he was a little stalker. A dry cleaners in a neighboring town received bloody clothes from Kelly a few days after the murders. And he also posed as a Scotland Yard officer to gain access into the home. If you don't know what a Scotland Yard officer is, think of Sherlock Holmes. Think of the Jack the Killer murders, because they always talk about the Scotland Yard police. They're in England. And he was an Englishman. So he's like, ooh, I can be a Scotland Yard officer. What? Yeah. But after a long interrogation, Kelly signed a confession detailing the murders and that he did it. But immediately after, he recanted this statement, with a jury refusing to indict him. Bum, bum, bum. As of today, though, nobody knows who killed the Moore family and the Stigler sisters, with the house now being haunted by the victims of this murder. Now let's get into some of the hauntings. The hauntings. People have caught EVPs of Mr. and Mrs. Moore, the Moore children, and the Stigler sisters, and even communicated with the victims through flashlights. The most haunted rooms are the, quote, blue room. This is where the Stigler sisters were sleeping. And, of course, upstairs where the Moores were sleeping. Investigators are torn on who is actually haunting the house, with some saying it's the victims based off of EVPs and being able to, quote, play with the children, with the balls and stuff. Others saying the killer is actually haunting the house. Visitors report feeling cold spots throughout the house, becoming sick with the need to leave the house immediately. And of course, once they leave, they feel 100% better. While others say both the victims and the killer could be haunting the property. On the show Kindred Spirits, which I'll play this clip right after, an EVP was picked up. One of the hosts, Adam Berry, asked the question, quote, "Did you do something to this family?" End quote. With someone responding, quote, "I killed them," end quote. While in the house, Adam felt like he shouldn't be there, explaining that whatever was in there wanted him out. And here is that clip.
I do not feel comfortable sitting here. I do not feel, okay. Okay. Do you know our friend John? Someone said something really bad to him about killing him. Can you tell me your name? Did you do something to this family? Did you kill those children? So I'm going to play this back to see if you talk to me.
I think it's working. Can you tell me your name? Did you do something to this family?
I killed them. I killed them. It says I killed them.
Is there somebody in there? You said on this recorder that you killed them. Major movement.
I heard it.
Are you behind me?
All right, you ready? You can wrap it out. You just come straight down into the barn with me. Hey. So how was that?
The moment I got in there, it became real. I could tell the differences between investigating alone in there sitting in that chair and you and I investigating. There was a moment when I was like, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
And I had to check that really quickly because I was like, no, because that's what it wants.
Yep.
And I constantly heard movement. I hear movement to my right. And that's when I was like, at any moment, something could like jump out at me.
Well, here's the thing. That was the most activity we've gotten since we've been here.
Yeah.
Like, you got clear EVPs while you were in there.
Right. I will say the weaker you are as an individual going into that house, the more vulnerable you are and the more activity that you get.
So, even though I stated earlier that we don't know who the killer is, new evidence has come up believing it's somebody that is now dubbed the Man from the Train. In 2017, a book written by Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James titled, quote, "The Man from the Train, the Solving of a Centuries-Old Serial Killer Murder," end quote. This book may have solved the mystery on who killed the Moore family and the Stiegler sisters that night. In their book, they took note of a series of murders similar to what was seen in Villisca. The murders took place from 1898 to 1912 from all over North America. The murderer is suspected to be Paul Mueller. They described Paul, who claimed to be a veteran from the German army, to be around 35. As of 1997, making him around 50 in 1912. So basically in 1897 he was 35, but in 1912 he would have been 50. That's what I'm getting at. He was short and he had a short and muscular stature, mostly working as a lumberjack, making him good with an axe, and which gives us another reason he could have been the killer. The murders that Paul committed were all similar, and this is a list of them. Local police believing it was a local murderer with connections to the victims. The scene being within a short walking distance from a railroad junction, giving him the name the Man from the Train. The slaughter of the entire family late at night in small towns with little to no police force. Families having a barn where the killer was believed to have hidden to observe the family, and the Moores did have a barn, or like a little shack. the families would have no dogs, which, you know, would have warned them that there's this random ass person in the house, get the hell up. The killer used the blunt edge of an axe as the murder weapon and would leave the weapon in plain sight. And of course, the axe was owned by the family. Victims would be covered with sheets or blankets prior to the murders. The moving or stacking of bodies after the murder, so he either covered their faces up or would move the bodies and stack them up. All of the windows and doors and mirrors would have been covered with sheets or towels with no robbery occurring, which is very similar in Villisca. This guy literally covered everything so he couldn't see his reflection either. In the end, the authors believe the killer to be Paul Mueller. The killings did stop in 1912, leading the authors to believe that Paul was caught, maybe for trying to murder another family. They believe he killed around 14 families with maybe some involvement in another 25 family murders. Lastly, they suggested that Paul may have committed the 1922 Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany, where a family of 5, including the maid, were killed. I'll do a separate episode on them in the future because of how strange it is. But, yeah. In conclusion, many people believe that the Villisca Axe murder case is unsolved, with others believing it has been solved, with the murderer being Paul Mueller. This was part 4 of me covering some of the most famous haunted locations in some U.S. states. In the next episode, I will be covering the Sally House, which is believed to be haunted by a, quote, little girl, end quote, in ancient Atkins, Kansas. Yeah, apparently there's a little girl haunting this house. If you know about it, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. I'll explain it in that episode. I hope everyone had a lovely Christmas, happy holidays. Next episode will be out in the new year. So with that out of the way, I will see you in 2024. That is so weird to say. With that out of the way, bye guys.